Hello and welcome everybody to Getting APIs to Work. Today we look at Microservice API Patterns, and for this we say hello to Daniel Lübke. Hey Daniel, how are you doing?
Hi Eric, thanks, I'm fine. I hope you too, and thanks for having me on your channel.
Well, thanks for joining. I think we talked about this already a while ago, and I found it very interesting because it's this attempt at making APIs a little easier to design by establishing a language or patterns for designing APIs. And I think that is really very interesting for a lot of people because there's so much API design going on, and the more we can depend on these kind of patterns being available, the more easy it becomes to design good APIs. The first thing I'd like to ask you is what prompted you to put time and effort into this microservice API patterns site and into the whole approach around it?
I think the question would be more who did this. So back in the day, so 2016, I think Olaf Zimmermann approached me and asked me whether I'd like to join him, and he had this idea of packaging design decisions, which we do all the time, in some reusable format. And we both were in large projects doing integration across organizations and APIs, or at the time it was a service. Yeah. So we really did lots of things there, and we stumbled across the same problems. And when new team members came into our projects, we had to say, okay, this is how we do it, and this is why we need to do it. And this became my personal motivation. So I really was a bit tired of explaining the same things over and over again. And so I was very happy that Olaf approached me. And so this is how it started. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good explanation, right? Like you get tired of doing things over and over again. So that points in all that scaling direction. That in the end, it's about scaling the practice, making things more repeatable, allowing people to more easily do the right thing.
So I know why they should do this. I mean, you see lots of blogs and things which tell you you must do it like that. And most often, if somebody tells you to do something every time, it's certainly wrong. So you need to understand when and why to use it and what consequences you have to bear if you use it. So the drawbacks of the solution.
One thing I'm wondering about is one thing that we see a lot now happening is organizations establishing guidelines, right? Inspired by like these very popular guidelines, like the Zalando guidelines out there, a couple others of popular guidelines that were just openly published on the web. And a lot of organizations find this very helpful because there is also some design guidance in those guidelines. How would you compare and maybe contrast microservice API patterns against those guidelines that I'm sure you've looked at also?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are lots of guidelines, and when this all started, it was very popular to write REST books. So it's also another source of experience. And what you see is you have strategic decisions on the top. So how do I cut my services? How do I cut my APIs as a consequence? And then down you have many publications talking about how to do a good HTTP or REST design. And in between there is a gap. So you know what your service should do, and you know, okay, at some point I need to use some technology. But in between you need to say, okay, what and how do I transfer data in and out of this product, out of the service? And there are many options, and these patterns actually really deal with making those decisions in between. And these are very technology agnostic. So the first patterns I saw when I was confronted with Corba, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. And they're still valid decisions, or these are decisions which I still have to make doing JSON, which is like 3 or 4 generations later.
Mm-hmm. So you would say that the guidelines oftentimes are a little bit more lower level, a little bit more closer to the technical aspects, and the patterns are a little bit higher level, really like what kind of problem does my API address and how do I translate that into a design? Is that a fair way to put it? Okay.
Yeah, that's a fair way. So if we look at, for instance, pagination, so that's something which we do a lot. So we have a request to a service which might return lots of data, and this data set is too large, so we chunk this in pages. So that's a very abstract concept. There are many ways to go around this technically. And then it's a question of how we then do technical design. So how I request a page number as a get parameter, or do I have a gRPC call? But before I need to make those decisions, first of all, I want to have a paginated service, and then what pagination strategy I want to have. And this is the level of abstraction which we address.
And I think to get a better idea of what the things are, you gave us one example, which is very useful, because I think everybody pretty much has had this problem at some point in time, that you have something that needs to be paginated. But I think to better illustrate the concepts of the patterns, maybe we should just dive a little bit into what's available there and how that can help you. So let's go over here, and this is what you get when you go to Microservice API Patterns.org. And if you could now maybe talk us a little bit through what those patterns are, how they are grouped, how they're categorized, and how you can apply a pattern.
Yeah, sure. So if you go to this website, so all the content is free. You can use that whatever you like. And if we scroll down a little bit, you have a map. And now I need to zoom out a little bit to get it on one screen. I'm sorry, but I still hope you can see this. And you see that there are different categories. So we have foundation, responsibility, structure, quality, and evolution. And in there you see lots of patterns. And I think it depends a little bit on how advanced you are in API design. So if you're a beginner or very new to API design, then probably just reading those patterns will help you and get aware of decisions you need to make. So we all know this, we all started, we all did probably the same mistakes, and we learn from those mistakes. And if you read these patterns, you probably can avoid some, hopefully most mistakes. And then if you're more advanced, this can really serve as a checklist. And I still use this. I mean, certainly I'm one of the 5 authors, so probably one of the top 5 readers. But in the end, it's even if I design an API, I take this as a kind of cheat sheet and check whether I thought of everything. And that's quite useful. The foundation and responsibility, that's if you're more advanced, it's a very simple concept. So you make your decisions, you frame your solution space. So do I want to have side effects, or do I just read data, or do some computations? What integrations do I want to achieve? And then structure and quality, it goes much deeper into the message itself. So how do I transfer data? What data do I transfer? So if you look here down, we have, for instance, context representation, which is something which you will find in all larger organizations at least. So you want to propagate which transaction you have, even if you call to other systems in the background, your security context, things like that. We have pagination, which we talked about earlier. And then we have quality, which is not all quality of an API, but which is, or these patterns are concerned with how can I, or if I structure my message, which I send as a request or response, what influence can I have on quality attributes? And that's security, but that's also performance. So here's a whole subcategory of things which I can do to make requests smaller, in a sense. And so conditional requests, so I only get data back if something has changed, or request bundles, which is, well, I think there you can see whether someone has designed lots of APIs or not. A request bundle actually means you bundle a set of requests. So instead of saying, give me one, give me one, give me one, you say, give me n, give me many, or execute this request on several objects in parallel, but not within a single transaction, but as independent transactions. So you get back a set of responses. So that's quite interesting because most people don't do this, because most protocols assume you have a single request. So these are all interesting patterns to get some ideas on how you can solve things. And then at the end, we have evolution. So there are lots of debates how to best evolve an API, and we just looked at what people do. So perhaps that's also an important point to stress. So patterns is not something which we invented. It's something where we looked what other people do, and then, well, try to give them names if there weren't any already, and just describe the solution which we found, at least in 3 different places, has this advantages and these disadvantages, and that's what people probably think if they use it. And so also in evolution, you have very different strategies, like in production, where you have an old API version and the new in parallel, or aggressive obsolescence, where you just deprecate everything away but stay on a single published version. Yeah, so these are the 5 broad categories which we have.
What I really like is that for each of those, right, you're never saying this is the way to do it, but it's really like this is a way to do it, and then there's always like certain consequences and side effects maybe of going that path. And I also like what you said for beginners. It might be just interesting to read through that, and maybe that's something that would be, where you could like a pattern a day, right? Like for somebody who wants to get used to API design a little bit and practices, right? Just like read one of those patterns every day, follow maybe some of the resources that are linked from all the patterns, and that will give you, I would say, a pretty good overview of API space.
That's a great idea. So we should create a calendar so we can just rip off a pattern every day to read.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Let's have a look at one pattern just to show our viewers a little bit, how this now like dives deeper into the pattern, what you actually get when you look at one of those patterns, and what the site provides as this pattern language.
Yeah, then let's stay with pagination. We talked about this, and then make the font a little larger again.
Thanks.
So is it okay, or a bit bigger?
Yeah, maybe a little bit bigger would be even better. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, good. So a pattern, and we know this from this Gang of 4 book, has a certain template, and so we have a context, so we describe a problem which we want to solve. And if I, as a reader, say, okay, that's what I want to solve, or I'm in the context, I have a problem which I want to solve, so it's more distilled. So the context has shows me constraints on my solution space. And then I have the forces, and forces seems to be a very abstract name, but let's say it's just quality attributes of my solution. So with all architectural decisions, I get something and I lose something. So we always have a trade-off, and that's important to know. So in the end, it's a good decision if what I get is more important to me than what I lose. And the forces is just a neutral way of saying, okay, this is what we influence. So if we have pagination, we influence performance, we influence data set size, we influence loose coupling and interoperability, we influence developer convenience, security, and session awareness. And then we describe the solution. So there's a how it works section with some figures. And here you say, okay, the consumer asks here, give me some data, and the server responds, okay, here's page 1. The first page, you get 5 records, and the next page is page 2. And then I can request page 2, and so on until all pages are retrieved, and the server returns that there's no next page. So that's one way to implement pagination. There are other ways, and these are listed under variants. So for many patterns, the same idea is solved in different ways, or similar but different ways. And for instance, here in pagination, here you have a cursor. So that's cursor-based navigation. You get a value back and you send this value and say, okay, from here I want to start, and you give me the next chunk of data. Another one would be page-based navigation, where you say, I really want to have page 5 or page 100. So you have random access more or less to the data. But usually this means that your database query are slower. So there's a trade-off again, random access versus data access performance. And the third would be offset-based navigation. So you would say, give me record 1000 to 1100, which is more or less very similar to the page-based one. So these are variants you can look into. And then we have an example. So that you really see how it can be implemented. This example, across the page, we don't focus on a single technology. So you will find some JSON HTTP things, sometimes perhaps some XML data. So it's deliberately chosen to be different so that you can see, okay, that's just an example, and yours might look different depending on technologies you choose. But there you can see, so you can see exchange messages. Sometimes you see some code, sometimes you see some diagrams. And then there are the consequences. So what gets better and what gets worse. So we improve resource consumption because we only have a subset of data in memory. But on the other hand here, for instance, if you have certain requirements on the data, so you have a record level, if you just fetch a whole tree, that's not possible. And it's more complex to implement, for instance, because you have more message exchanges if you apply pagination. And so this structure, I know uses obviously. So as I said, we didn't invent this, and we give some examples which we found on the web or in books or in our projects, where we say, okay, these people use this, and we link all that so you can go there and say, okay, I want to have a look at how they did this. And so you see, it's not just random thought and some theorists going there and telling you what to do, but it's actually real world knowledge or experience. Yeah, so that's essentially what the pattern looks like.
I have one because I'm really interested in that specific aspect, so to speak. If you look at known uses, I think there's like two different, let's say, I could say patterns. There's two different ways how known uses could occur, right? It could just be that somebody just designs basically a way how to paginate. They just design it, and then you say, look, here they did that. But there also could be a standard that just does that, right? So for at least for XML, right, there was Atom as a format, and then there was a standard for Atom pagination, right? So there was a standard where you could say a known use is not just a specific API, but there actually is a specification that you can basically just depend on. So it's not just that it's an API, but it's like a whole standard, like a whole building block you can just reuse. Is that something that you differentiate, or would both of these ways show up in your known uses?
It would both show up there. And
Okay.
it's a good point of it, yeah, because we actually missed to put this up, but we will extend this section. But both would be there, so you would see
Okay.
standards, libraries, as well, or frameworks which do that, and then concrete APIs.
Okay, that's cool. Because from my point of view, that is one of the things that would be really interesting to have there, right? Like here is like basically a piece of technology that, let's say, if you use XML or if you use JSON, whatever, right? Like you can just plug that in basically into what you're doing. And then that becomes not just a pattern, but also a technology that just implements that pattern. Anyway,
that's true.
thanks a lot. That's super useful. As I said, I think in particular for people who are like in the day-to-day business of designing APIs, it probably would be just an interesting exercise to check out the stuff that's there. And for those who are beginning, read your daily pattern. We should make that a thing. Like every day, have a tweet. Here's your daily pattern.
Yeah.
At some point, you're. So, how many patterns do you have overall?
Oh, I need to count them, especially because we are currently writing more, so they're not all on the homepage. But it's a good two-digit number. So let me quickly count this.
Yeah, I would have said like 30 to 40, probably more 40 or even more. Right?
Yeah,
There's a
it's in that
good
range.
bunch. Yeah.
So it's quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some which you really like, and some where you say, okay, I already knew this, but then focus on the things you didn't know before. So that's the value.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like everybody probably has some things that they already have encountered, so they're aware of that. And then there are other things where you might say, "Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that." There are different variations of how to do that, and different ways how that actually influences the API that I'm building.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Daniel, for walking us through that. I think it's really interesting, and I think that we will see more and more like this. And I think this is a good kind of precursor to more of those things to show up, where like the whole practice of designing APIs becomes a little bit more, I don't want to say formalized, but more well thought through and better supported by things such as this.
And we agree on certain terms. So what we found is that many things, or many people, or many projects do similar things, but have completely different names for that. And I think that's also with many other pattern books. It's important that you agree on a vocabulary. So that if you today say, okay, we use a listener or an event or something, then we don't need to define what it is. And with pagination, I think we are there as well. But with other terms in the API space, there are many different names for the same concept. And my hope would be that we, as a community, standardize on certain names for certain concepts.
That's a good point. I was just about to say that it's like, yeah, pagination probably is one of the things where people now agree on that this is a thing, and everybody knows what you're talking about. But you're completely right that for many of the other things, there probably isn't quite that consensus there. So another good reason, I think, to check out Microservices API Patterns. Daniel, any last words from you or that you want to share with us about the site, the way things are going, what to expect? What are you working on about that particular project of yours?
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to invite everyone to really go there, use the site. As I said, it's free. If you have feedback, anything you missed, then just drop us an email. This year there will be certain news, which how's it put in political speech? So, which I cannot confirm or deny that this will happen. But
Very good.
Essentially, I think in mid of this year we will have some news. From what
you may have, or you may not. You cannot talk about
I don't know. But I would say certainly we will have some news where we can talk about that, and so you can really look at the page, subscribe to the newsletter, and get informed. So as I said, we work on many things right now, and you will get more content, definitely, more descriptions, and yeah. So that's all I can say right now.
That's good enough. And now everybody is like waiting for mid-year what's happening. Thanks again for being here, and I really would like to encourage everybody to at least check it out. It's really interesting. It's something that hopefully gets you thinking a little bit about the design practices that you have, and maybe some ways of how we can more easily talk about API design. So that would be really cool. Thanks everybody for watching. Once again, thanks for joining, and until the next time, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.